probably had a fever this year. Your body got hot. Your muscles ached. You felt awful for a day or two. Then it passed. You barely thought about it again. You didn't wonder if you'd survive the night. But for almost all of human history, that same fever was a death sentence. No medicine, no diagnosis, no way to even know what was attacking you. Just heat, fear, and waiting to see who in your family woke up the next morning. For over 99% of the time humans have existed on this planet, disease was the deadliest predator we ever faced. Not lions, not wolves, not famine even. Something you couldn't see, couldn't hear coming, and couldn't fight with a spear. And somehow, against all of it, every single one of your ancestors survived long enough to have children. Thousands of generations, unbroken. If even one of them hadn't made it, you wouldn't exist. Not in some abstract sense. You, specifically, would never have happened. So what actually happened inside their bodies during the worst outbreaks in human history? How did some people walk through a plague that killed half their town and come out the other side? The answer isn't buried in a history book. It's still inside you right now, written directly into your genes in a language scientists have only just learned to read. Let's start with the worst one, the Black Death. Between 1346 and 1353, a pandemic now known as the Black Death killed up to 60% of the population of Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. Entire towns emptied out in weeks. Ships drifted into harbors with no living crew left to dock them. For almost 700 years, nobody knew exactly where it began. Then in 2022, a team led by archaeogeneticist Maria Spießruh at the University of Tübingen finally cracked it. The clue had been sitting in a museum since 1886. Historian Philip Slavin was studying old excavation records from Kyrgyzstan when he noticed something strange. Near a lake called Issyk Kul, two cemeteries showed a massive spike in burials in the years 1338 and 1339. Years before the plague ever reached Europe. The tombstones, carved in Cyrillic script, gave one cause of death over and over: pestilence. Slavin brought in Spießruh's team to test it. They pulled ancient DNA from the teeth of 7 people buried at those sites. Teeth hold blood vessels. Blood vessels hold evidence even after 700 years in the ground. What they found was unmistakable. Yersinia pestis, the bacteria behind bubonic plague. Genetically, this exact strain sat right at the root of a massive evolutionary explosion the moment the plague bacteria split into the family of strains that would tear across 3 continents less than a decade later. They hadn't just found a clue. They had found patient zero's neighborhood, the Tian Shan Mountains on the border of modern Kyrgyzstan and China. Year confirmed, 1338. Mystery solved almost 700 years late. So how did anyone survive what came next? In 2014, anthropologist Sharon DeWitt at the University of South Carolina went looking for an answer, not in tombstones, in bones. She spent a decade studying more than one, zizone skeletons pulled from London cemeteries kept in the archives of the Museum of London. Some buried before the Black Death arrived. Some buried after it had already passed through. DeWitt examined every skeleton for 2 things: age at death and small signs of stress on the bone itself. Porous lesions, markers of malnutrition, evidence of a body that had been struggling long before the plague ever showed up. The numbers she found were strange. Before the plague, only about 10% of people lived past age 70. After it, more than 20% did. Double. The plague hadn't killed randomly. It had killed the frail first, people with weak immune systems, old injuries, childhood malnutrition. The survivors weren't simply lucky. Their bodies were already built differently before the plague ever arrived. And that difference carried forward into how long they and their children went on to live. This wasn't random. This was selection. But built differently how? For decades, nobody could answer that. The DNA technology to look that closely didn't exist yet. Then in 2022, a second team picked up exactly where DeWitt left off. Geneticist Jennifer Klunk, working with McMaster University's Ancient DNA Center, pulled DNA from over 200 skeletons. People who died right before, during, and after the Black Death in both London and Denmark. Her team scanned 356 different immune-related genes, looking for any that shifted hard in frequency the moment the plague hit. Out of that search, 245 gene variants stood out as having changed. But one mattered more than all the others combined: AP2. A complicated name for a protein with a simple job. It helps your immune cells spot an infection before it has a chance to spread through your body. Researchers later tested it directly, exposing human immune cells carrying the gene to live Yersinia pestis bacteria in a lab. The cells with the protective version fought the infection off far better than the ones without it. People who carried that protective version of ERAP2 were 40 to 50% more likely to survive the Black Death than people who didn't. Almost half again as likely to live through the worst pandemic in recorded history. In evolutionary terms, that is about as strong as selection gets. Most traits take thousands of years to shift a population's gene pool, even slightly. The Black Death did it in less than a decade. Now here's the twist nobody saw coming. Klunk's team didn't stop at the graveyard. They checked who carries that same gene today. Millions of people do. Quite possibly you. The exact gene that helped your ancestors survive the Black Death is the same gene now linked to a higher risk of Crohn's disease and rheumatoid arthritis. Both are autoimmune disorders, a fancy term for your own immune system attacking your own healthy tissue by mistake. The weapon built to fight the plague never fully stood down. 700 years later, it may still be swinging, just at the wrong target. Picture London in the winter of 1349. Church bells ring almost constantly because there are too many funerals to schedule them apart anymore. Mass graves are dug in advance just to keep up. A family crowds into one small room to share body heat, not knowing that's exactly how the disease spreads fastest between them. A mother presses a damp cloth to her son's forehead and counts the dark, swollen lumps under his arm. She has no name for what's happening. No idea that something called Yersinia pestis is multiplying inside him, or that a protein called ERAP2 is, right now, either helping his immune cells fight it or failing to. She just knows some children in this house will wake up tomorrow, and some won't. And whichever ones do wake up, they are carrying something forward. Not just memories, not just a family name. Code. A tiny molecular advantage, invisible to everyone in that room, about to get passed down through 25 generations until it reaches you. This isn't the only ancient battle still playing out in your blood. Go back further. Not 700 years. 60,000. In 2020, geneticists Hugo Zerberg and Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology compared modern human DNA against an actual Neanderthal genome pulled from a roughly 50 0-year-old skeleton found in Croatia. They found a stretch of DNA on chromosome 3, one of the 23 bundles your genetic code is organized into, that was almost identical between that Neanderthal and a large share of modern humans alive right now. That segment, spanning about 50,000 base pairs, didn't appear by coincidence. It passed into our species through interbreeding, somewhere around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago, back when Homo sapiens and Neanderthals briefly shared the same landscape and occasionally had children together. Today, that exact inherited segment is the single strongest known genetic risk factor for ending up hospitalized with severe COVID-19. Around 16% of Europeans carry it. Close to half of South Asians do. It is almost entirely absent in East Asia and Africa. A piece of Neanderthal DNA inherited tens of thousands of years before any virus called COVID existed, quietly deciding who gets sicker right now. in this decade from a disease no Neanderthal ever encountered. So what was that segment actually doing for 60,000 years before any of us had heard of a coronavirus? Nobody knows for certain yet. Even Pabo himself has called the finding striking and admitted the reason behind it still needs investigating. But researchers studying it suspect the same pattern as the Black Death. It likely protected our ancestors against something else entirely, some older threat we can no longer identify from this distance. And whatever it once bought them, it came with a price tag that's still being paid by their descendants, 60,000 years later. Two different diseases, 700 years apart and 60,000 years apart. Two completely unrelated genes discovered by two completely different teams of scientists who weren't even looking for each other's work. And yet, the exact same pattern twice. Survival always comes with a price. And evolution doesn't care about your comfort 50 generations later. It only cares whether the price gets paid before or after you have children. Once you've reproduced, your genome has already done its job as far as evolution is concerned. Everything that happens after that, every autoimmune flare-up, every extra risk factor, is something your descendants simply inherit for better or worse, with no say in the matter. That's the part nobody tells you about surviving something terrible. The cost doesn't disappear once the danger is gone. It just changes shape and gets quietly handed down to people who will never know what it was originally for. Think about what that actually means for you, specifically. The reason your immune system reacts the way it does to a common cold, to a vaccine, to your own joints flaring up on a bad arthritis day isn't random. It's a record, a genetic ledger of every plague, virus, and famine your ancestors barely lived through, written in a language you never agreed to learn and can't opt out of reading. You didn't choose this immune system. Neither did they. It was built under conditions almost none of us would survive today by people solving a problem we can barely imagine, watching their own children get sick with absolutely no idea why, and somehow, generation after generation, getting just enough of them through it to keep the line going. So the next time you run a fever, lie there for one moment before you reach for the medicine. That heat isn't a malfunction. It's an old strategy, older than written language, older than agriculture, inherited from people who buried more children than they ever got to raise. They didn't have antibiotics. They didn't have vaccines. They didn't even have a name for the thing that was killing them. All they had was whatever their bodies could throw at it. And whatever happened to work got passed down to the next generation, whether they understood why or not. You are the version of the story where it worked. Every single time, without exception, for roughly 300,000 years straight. No break in the chain, not once. That fever you barely noticed this year wasn't nothing. It was an inheritance, and somewhere inside it, a very old war was still quietly being fought on your behalf.